Yeah, I have a few slides prepared for everyone, and thank you for joining me here as well from my side. Yes, so the ebook Amara just mentioned is transferable. If you already have the book, you can regift. Regifting in this particular case is perfectly okay. So you can send that book to somebody else. If you don't have my book yet, then there will be an ebook for one lucky winner, and the rest can purchase it somewhere on their favorite retailer. I was lucky enough to have Pearson as a publisher in the background to bring this important topic, in my opinion, out there and create awareness. Just in case the book was released by the end of 2024, so it's relatively new. If you haven't heard about that, there is another book out there, and that book is called Atomic Habits. And this is just in case you're not familiar with the title of our webinar here today. So that's a very, very popular book. And that's something I want to connect the dots between a very popular book on the retail side from James Clear with a topic that is obviously of much interest, and that is agility. And here I'm super thrilled to be hosted here by Comparative Agility. And I'm going to get into some of those things here, how all of those things are somehow related to each other and how they actually benefit each other. I think that's going to be part of my webinar here today. So as you see here on the top right side, if you're interested, our working weightlifting brain, that is really in the spirit of Agile Kata, just in case you're not familiar with that term. This is Kata comes out of martial arts, has been then popularized through a book, Toyota Kata by Mike Rother in 2009. And since then, we're using the term kata for these kind of deliberate practice and deliberate practice of scientific thinking. So that is really what we want to instill in the business world. So just in case of clarification, if you're new to the term kata, what it relates to, and it's also the link to our weightlifter here in the background. Okay, so here we go. I already mentioned the book, Atomic Habits. And by the way, we do have some time for questions. I think there is a question and a tab here where you can already ask some questions, and we will get to those. And I hope we have many of those, because that's really what this whole presentation is all about, to really generate some curiosity and interest, and also to like put things into perspective and context. And so that's my goal here today. So let's get started with the book Atomic Habits and linking the topics together. I don't know if you guys want to put maybe something into the chat here on the webinar who has read Atomic Habits. Most likely many of you guys have, because 20 million copies were sold worldwide. And here, this is, as I said, this is one that is on my bookshelf. Read this book a few years ago. It came out 2018, if I'm not mistaken, right? And has been, Times bestseller, 150 weeks. And the reason I'm telling you all this about this book is the book has been extremely successful. It has a ranking or rating here of 4.8 out of 140,000 reviews on Amazon alone. So when you look at just the statistics, people are really in need for these kind of changes. And that's what really the title is, the tiny changes, remarkable results. So it seems like a lot of people struggle with change in their personal lives, right? And they're trying to break these habits they have in place. And this book really filled in this niche, obviously, for which is going by sales numbers here and by popularity, and also by the rating. So they find a lot of inspiration in this book. I did too, right? So you can actually look at these items in this book, and we're going to explore some of those, and we're going to link that to agility. So this is just a demonstration of there is a need. People are struggling on an individual level of how to break these patterns. How do we do this? And here are these atomic habits. I'm going to showcase just a few steps, just in case you're not familiar with the book itself. So why is it so successful? Why is so many books have been sold? Because these atomic habits really go into various kind of industries, right? So they all have something in common. It's about personal life, let's say, right? So it's about lifestyle, it's about your personal life, but it also goes into financial habits, right? Your growth as a person. We'll see an example here in a second about health and fitness. where you can take ownership over some of those habits in your own personal life, and you can use it for personal productivity, and just in general, just to change some existing habits into something new. And that made this book so broadly um, interesting to the folks out there. And I guess that's what is this widespread interest. All right, so here are the 4 steps. I mean, this is more like a very basic summary here of those things, but I just want to get to Agile, obviously, as quick as possible here with you. So when we're looking at the atomic habits, there's basically 4 key steps here that are really of interest. And basically what James is putting out here is, it says the first step is really to make it obvious, right? So basically making it visible, what is it we're trying to achieve before you make it attractive, right? So how do we make this new habit that we're trying to engrave into our system, engrave here in terms of making it persistent? How do I basically make this attractive to myself, and how do I actually get started with this? How do I make this as easy as possible to overcome the initial hurdles? And that's the response over here. And then here also, because we are humans and somehow we are triggered by this, we do like the reward at the end. How do I make it satisfactory to myself? So when you are following these 4 steps and they're coming out of this book over there is a very successful way, and many of these people and the reviews, I went through many of those online, are reporting back that that pattern, those 4 steps, if deliberately practiced, will change behavior and will have some positive impact on what they were trying to do, let's say financials or health and fitness and all of those things we just looked at. So that's a little bit of the background of the Atomic Habits by this book. So what basically James is saying, and so I'm just going to link those 2 things here now to a failed approach to something that would be promoted by the book Atomic Habits. So if we're just going to compare these 2 things, and maybe you're already seeing some of the similarities to when we're working in agile ways. And let me just put this out here. So for example, a failing approach would be, I will eat better this year, right? So that could be one of the statements we would be giving us, let's say on the 1st of January each year, or maybe the day before, where we're so hopeful about the new year ahead. And we're going to say like, oh, I'm going to eat better this year. Obviously, we can see this is very vague. This is not very specific whatsoever. What does actually eating better mean? And the entire year, right? There's another thing we could say. We could say we're forcing ourselves through grueling workouts, right? So that could be another thing of establishing a healthier lifestyle. So we would like, oh, I'm going to work out. I'm going to do these big things, right? And sounds familiar, right? And I have been myself in these kind of shoes. And, it's like, okay, these big plans and these big efforts of where I would say I'm going to exercise for a long period of time and I'm with great intensity. So also about the length, I want to start with a 90-minute workout, right? So that would be another thing, right? We would say like, okay, big aspirations here, 90 minutes of time, and we give ourselves long-term goals. We have like these big programs where we expect something to happen in terms of better lifestyle at the end, but these are very long-term goals. And very often we see that on an organizational level, very similar, right? So we have these aspirations, they're not very specified. The activities are very hard, more possibly complicated to get started with, and they're very lengthy. So basically what James is saying, hey, let's do this a little bit different. Instead of just feeling eating better, let's make it obvious, right? And what does that actually mean in terms of those 4 steps, or those 4 yellow things you see, or those 4 key steps we just saw out crystallized out of the book of the Atomic Habits? So what that actually would mean, make it obvious, is put your gym clothes out the night before. Make them visible, right? So when you do get up in the morning and you have this goal of doing this, that is a very small atomic habit change, and we're getting ready to get started. Making it attractive would be, instead of these grueling workouts, right, we would be saying, hey, I actually have more enjoyment exercising with someone. So let's make it attractive. I'm going to go with somebody. Let's do some pair exercising with someone. If that is, obviously, is very specific to somebody, but that could be one of those things. Making it easy could be we're focusing on consistency over intensity, right? So we're saying like it is more important. That's what James is saying in his book, is making more consistency is more important about intensity. And that's an interesting thing because, for example, he mentioned to not have a 2 day break of his exercise routine, only 1 day break. So if he doesn't have an exercise for 1 day, he definitely has one the following day, just to not have that kind of break of 2 days, which would make him go easier back into the old habit. So he's focusing on consistency over intensity. And the satisfactory part, making it the reward at the end, he would give himself a reward of having a post-workout downtime, something he might not have had otherwise. So he really enjoyed uh, to put like not himself, but outline in his book to have that kind of reward at the end. So when we're looking at these kind of things, these are very different, very small kind of changes to it. So when I was going through this book and I was building Agile Kata, I was like, oh, there's a lot of similarities in it, and I would like to show you how this would work. So, for example, I'm going to now transition you over to my book a little bit, right? We're going to build some comparisons here in a second because that's our part of our topic here today. But before we go and see the comparison, let me just show you what Agile Kata is, and then later we're going to give you some directional kind of things of what to do next, and obviously how to link this topic of Agile Kata to organizational kind of changes. Right. So, all right. So the Agile Kata, as we said, is the deliberate practice of scientific thinking. And what you do see is on the left side on this image here in front of you, you see also 4 steps. It's coincidental here that the two books have 4 steps, but these are the 4 steps. These are the core steps of Agile Kata, and they're directly linked from what Mike Rother wrote in Toyota Kata as the improvement kata. So those are the 4 steps. So basically, what Agile Kata is built on is this routine, this pattern, right? It's not a process, it is a pattern. It's not a framework, it is a pattern that is deliberately practiced ongoingly. So if you're joining here and you might have a background in process frameworks such as Scrum, or you have some background in Kanban or other lean things, or even SAFe, or whatever your background is in terms of agility, and you come into this session, Agile Kata is something very, very different. Agile Kata is more seen as a pattern. Now, you could argue, yes, there is a sequence in the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But the idea is really to practice those deliberately, and through that, producing change. So the outcome of Agile Kata would be a process rather than being a process itself. So what you see here is that the 4 steps are basically definitions of scientific thinking. If you have produced like a thesis as part of your master's or bachelor's or doctorate program, you would be probably very familiar with this approach, right? Because that is really what you would be doing in a scientific work. However, we are applying this in the business context, right? So we're taking this pattern and say, like, what if we apply this in the business world? What if we're saying, hey, why don't we, before we even get started with anything, trying to understand what the challenge is ahead of us? And that's really step number 1 here. You see that the person are actually looking at that peak of a mountain in far, far distance, and trying to see, like, what is our goal? What is it we're trying to achieve in this product development, in this transformation, in this introduction of new ideas? I'm just saying, let's say AI or things like that. What is it we're trying to achieve organizationally? What's our challenge? That is usually a longer term goal. Sometimes we speak up to 2 years in the manufacturing space, but in the knowledge work where Agile Kata is really home, we would say like somewhere in the 9 months time frame. That is not a rule. There's no specificity around that. It's purely like a number and orientation. It shouldn't be a 10-year kind of thing. It should be more like something we can overlook. So 9 months feels right, but it could be anything less. So it doesn't have to be that time window. It is a challenge, something we want to overcome. We don't know, because that's really part of the word challenge. We don't know if it's possible, right? There's an uncertainty in it, but it's a challenge means there's a possibility. It's not totally out of the picture. So once we have that, so we have that challenge, we have that direction of where we would like to go, we're going to take a step back. And that's an interesting point here. And I always point that out when I talk about Agile Kata, is that we're stepping back in time. So if you're seeing this whole thing as a timeline, we say, like, first, we're going to look far, far ahead into the future. What is the challenge? What is the direction we want to go? But then immediately after that, we're going to come back and look at the present. We're basically saying, like, what is our current condition? So our condition would be, what state am I currently in, right? So that is what I'm trying to understand. So, and there's tooling involved, and somebody here, you see these two people looking at a piece of paper. They're trying to figure out where they are. That is an important step. If you have been in agile transformations before, or part of it, or led agile transformations, many of them, because I have been part of many of those agile transformations, they just started with, like training or certain coaching without that step. And then later, years later, when people were asked, so were we successful? Does Agile work for us? The answer to that is very often gray, right? Because we didn't take that snapshot in time. We never really took that effort. And it's not a lengthy activity, but we never really looked at where are we right now. So we have that comparison is lost in this thing. So that is an important step. Now, once we know where we are, we take a small step forward. And that is we're establishing the next target condition. And you see that little mountain there in between that mountain and the challenge in the far, far distance surrounded by some clouds. So when you are here and establishing the next target condition, that is a short thing. That is a short step we would like to take. And again, if you're coming out of the process world of, let's say, Scrum or Safe or any of or any kind of iterative development, you would say, oh, that sounds like a sprint or that sounds like an iteration. It's not, right? So this is not time bound. This is not like we're going to have a rhythm of time. We're trying to get to the next target condition in a short period of time, but as short as possible. So we're not really planning by time. We are planning of what is the target condition I would like to achieve. So that is a step in between. Is obviously an area which is not defined yet, and that's going to happen in step 4. We're going to see a bunch of experiments that could possibly get us from the current condition to the next target condition, and that is step 4, the experimentation. You see different kind of arrows here. You see 3 arrows going from 2 to 3, and those are the experiments. These are the indications there's different paths we can take from 2 to 3. Not every path is successful. Sometimes multiple paths are options, but one seems to be more promising than the other one. So there are different kind of approaches we can take. So when we are taking going from 2 to 3, and we're having a team work together on trying to find that path, they might have tons of learning from going from 2 to 3, but they don't have the plan in the beginning that will give them the direction of what to do. We're going to leave that up to a totally self-organized team. All right. So that is, in a nutshell, what we're calling the Agile Kata is the foundation of it. Obviously, there's much, much more to it. And you might say, like, oh, why do I need the book? If I see those 4 steps, I'm going to just do this, right? Yes, you can certainly experiment with those 4 steps. However, the art of doing a kata work is in the practices, is in the patterns that go along with these steps to accomplish these things. And obviously also some coaching, because obviously that kind of self-organization around working these 4 steps, that is demanding on different levels. So this is more like the pattern we're going to execute. And here are some nuances to it. In kata language, this is what you see in front of you, is the starting point. Agile Kata starts with those 4 steps. You might, in the duration of executing these steps, identify an additional step, or you would change something in an existing step. And that's perfectly okay, right? Because you're advancing your own scientific method to something that is very context-driven within your organization. So it's a very unique approach you would be taking. All right. So this is basically the core in terms of the understanding. So now we know from our beginning the atomic habits, the 4 steps we saw, and we saw the 4 steps of the Agile Kata. So the question is, why are these two different? What's the purpose, and what are the shared parts of these kind of things? So now I am the sales for Agile Kata is definitely not in the 20 million as James Clear's book, but I am trying to compare these two things a little bit. So please forgive me if I'm putting these two books next to each other and you feel like, oh, wow, Joe is putting his book next to James's book. But I'm trying to use that to compare these two things. And the first thing, I want to look at the shared foundation. And the reason for that is if we are in the millions, if in the hundreds of thousands of people are saying that this is very helpful to change my existing personal habits with atomic habits, and we have a shared foundation between how we work organizationally versus personally, then there is more to it. Then I could say, well, if it's on the personal level so difficult to change, and here is this pattern, why don't we apply a similar pattern in the organizational world to also make us successful? So we want to build these two things together and say like, hey, there is a lot of synergies. So first and foremost, both Atomic Habits and Agile Kata focus on very small improvements, but on an ongoing basis. So the changes are small and incremental. And you can see that. And now with the context we just have is we're going to do step-by-step experimentation toward our target condition. So that is one of the shared pieces of it. James also puts out that the goal sets the direction, but the system drives progress. So that's an interesting statement. That's actually a somewhat modified quote coming right out of the book, right? That's very interesting, right? So it's the systems over goals. That's an interesting thing, right? So what is the pattern we're using? So he says, like, let's continue with the pattern. We're going to practice the pattern deliberately, and that will actually drive us towards the goal. But it's less important than the direction. So when we're seeing this, we can see on the Agile Kata side now that the cycles, right, of performing the steps 1 to 4 as we have is a system for building sustainable agility. Super interesting stuff here. He also said consistency over repetition. So repeating the habit is to drive the identity of that person, right? So you're becoming a non-smoker. On day number 1, you're stopping smoking. That's one of his examples, right? So you're already a non-smoker on day number 1. You're not trying to quit smoking. And on an Agile Kata level, we would be saying repeating this pattern builds organizational agility. So feedback loops are involved in Atomic Habits. It's the rewards, it's the visibility, and here for us, it's the experimentation records because we are documenting our experiments as well as the results of what happened so that we're not biased on these things. And we're learning through frequent inspections. We can call them retrospectives if you want, but not in the sense of periodic and rhythmic or anything. It depends on really on completion of an experiment or reaching a target condition. And last but not least, you're becoming the person you want to be in the Atomic Habits, right? So if you are applying that, and the Agile Kata would be the equivalent of building the kind of organization you want to become. So these are like the different kind of views in terms of similarities. Now, here are the differences, right? In Atomic Habits, it's really focusing on the individuals, whereas the Agile Kata focuses on teams and organizations. The scope, as you can read here in front of you, I'm just going to give you like piece by piece here, is on personal goals, whereas in Agile Kata, we're looking at business challenges. The structure is the 4 laws of behavior change, and we have the Agile Kata pattern. In the accountability, we are self-driven, and in Agile Kata, we have embedded teams, right? We're having the dynamics of teams that brings conflict, working in teams, facilitation of teams. So there's a different level of complexity here. We're looking at life changes versus organizational agility. There are some backgrounds is behavioral psychology for Atomic Habits, whereas in Agile Kata, we can say pieces of that, yes, but also a lot around lean and scientific thinking. So the Toyota way, Toyota Kata, um, everything related to Toyota is probably a good origin for Agile Kata as well. We are measuring the milestones and in streaks, as I just mentioned, like how many times do I exercise consistency day by in, day out without kind of breaks, right? So I'm getting these streaks. If you are a Peloton user, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In Agile Kata, we have these target conditions that we reach in a relatively short period of time. And we're using the feedback cycle, obviously, individually. Myself, I see the impact my changes have on myself. Whereas in Agile Kata, we learn from retrospectives and storyboards. These are like visualization tools we're using in Agile Kata to see our approach. So you see, like there are some differences, but the foundation is there, and we want to utilize and take that kind of confidence, I would say, we have in one area which is very successful and apply it to other ones. So if we're looking at, this is me again, right? So this is a screenshot from the Comparative Agility website, and you see you can take the Agile Kata assessment. And I'm super happy that the team of Comparative Agility actually went through with me, with their data scientists, and we and everybody involved here. Obviously, it's a bigger team to put this assessment out for the Agile Kata, and that's really a capability assessment, not so much of a knowledge assessment, which we have on Agile Kata Pro. If you're interested, that's agilekata.pro. There's a website where you can take a personal assessment, but this is really about capabilities. And I'm super happy that the assessment exists and you can assess yourself, how much is your organization already ready for Agile Kata, but also more like a tool you can use to see what are the discrepancies of where you are current now in terms of are you ready, readiness on Agile Kata. So you could say if you are using Agile Kata, for example, for agile transformations, let's say, you can take the comparative agility assessment of the Agile Kata and to assess where you are currently. And we can say currently the current condition, right? So you can say my organization's current conditions in terms of agility is XYZ in terms of readiness for Agile Kata. Obviously, there's many other assessments out there you can take, but this is more very focused on Agile Kata. So I invite you to do that. I'm going to do that actually in a minute again with a link and everything. But just to illustrate of what's possible here right now when you're taking that kind of assessment. And the beauty of Agile Kata and tooling around comparative agility is that you can take that assessment over and over again. Now, obviously not necessarily every week or two, but you can do that on a less frequent cadence, and you can see how is your organization moving towards more agility with Agile Kata. So that's super interesting stuff. So this is very isolated you can take, and you can just assess yourself against scientific thinking, experimentation, the agile mindset, for example. It's not so much about the 4 steps you just saw. That would be knowledge, right? How to execute kind of this. It's more in terms of readiness for having a mindset for agility and lean and scientific thinking. Now, here's something else you can do with Agile Kata, and also links me to comparative agility. I don't know if you noticed, there's more out there on comparative agility, and it's just a sample. There's many more. I just took a few screenshots. So you can actually use Agile Kata to transform or to introduce new ideas, right? So for example, if you let's say you're just a total example here right now, but if you're in an organization that is very Scrum heavy and you want to bring in scaling around Scrum, Agile Kata could be your pattern of doing this, right? So you can say currently we're innocent in terms of maturity around scaling with Scrum, and I want to change that. Agile Kata could be the pattern to do that. The same is true for Bossa Nova from Jutta Exler and John Bach, for example. You can, if your organization is interested in creating a higher degree of psychological safety, Agile Kata could be your pattern to do that. I just saw an announcement that Jürgen Appelor is providing one around AI readiness, right? Maybe the combination of that. How do I introduce AI into an organization, or even more so, making it more integral part of it? Agile Kata could be your pattern for that. We are working here in the United States with large organizations that have agile coaches on staff, and they're using Agile Kata to improve their coaching stance in their organization. But you can combine that with other assessments, right? So you can use the Agile Kata not only on its own and say, I want to create that kind of culture with my organization, right? You can also use it to change and almost like puzzle pieces, use other motivations like OKRs, performance index, beyond budgeting, Kanban, all of those kind of things you see here in front of you right now. You can use those using Agile Kata. Really cool kind of pattern for organizational change. It's the culture you're creating as a result of that. In my book, I speak a lot about Spotify, right? Or have some examples around Spotify. And a lot of teams have in previous years always mentioned, oh, and the Spotify model and so on. The Spotify model is really something that is something that emerged over the time, right? So there's an organization that started with something, and they utilized a lot of practices and things that worked for them, and they adjusted it to their organization. There's really no guarantee, and most of the time when organizations are trying to adopt that, they realize that we're not Spotify, we're a different organization, and therefore the process just doesn't copy and paste to your own culture. You cannot create the culture by copying and pasting an existing process or framework. So Agile Kata really is the pattern that drives that kind of change forward. It's a little bit more longer lasting, but it's a deeper experience when you do that. So there's a different kind of attitude of what you would do. So the invitation is here to use Agile Kata so that you can create your own Spotify version, if you want to call it this way, for your own company. Obviously, you have to replace the word Spotify with your company name, but Agile Kata over time can create that. So in terms of next steps here, so I have a few ideas before we open up, like for some questions here. I would love to hear what you guys think. So my invitation is here. What would you do if you're now comparing, let's say, the ideas from Atomic Habits, which you might have read or be familiar with? Maybe you already have some background in kata, or if you're new to it, you feel intrigued right now based on what you saw. Oh, 4 steps, cultural change, not so much of a process. The process will emerge as a result of executing the pattern. There will be scientific thinking behind it, and a lot of experimentation. There's no time boxing. There is no iterations, if you want to, at least no fixed time iterations in it. And the steps are extremely simple. That doesn't make it necessarily easier, but it changes the way of how we build things within organization from a cultural perspective. So question is for you is here, what kind of small steps can you take for big outcomes? And where will you start? So I have a few offers here for you. Now, the first one is really to go exactly to what I just mentioned, to take option 1 would be probably an easy starting point to really go to the Comparative Agility link below, and I'm sure you can find that on the tiles, but you can also go for that link down here, and just complete the assessment. These are a bunch of statements, and you will be asked to assess yourself as depending on what view you're taking, organization, department, team, or possibly individual. You can say, where are you right now in terms of compatibility around Agile Kata? You get a couple of statements here, and you'll be asked to assess. And you can do that today, or you can do that tomorrow, right after this talk, and you can see where you are currently. And maybe there are some areas where you said, oh, wow, my organization could make a big step forward here and there. And here we go. Now you have a starting point. Now you have a challenge, and Agile Kata can take over for you. You start using that pattern on a deliberate practice kind of pattern over and over again. So that would be starting point number one, the option number one here for you guys to get started right away, because this is very, very practical, I must say, as a starting point. I think this would be good. I think the power here, if you're doing this on a team or organizational level, is to invite all your colleagues too and take that assessment and say, like, how do we think and how do we separately think, right? So you would do this individually, but as a team. Option two would be really to take a course, right? I'm going to invite you to, as I said before, to come to agilekata.pro and take a course. There's foundational training, learn the pattern, take a course, understand the pattern, see the opportunities. And you see here some pictures here in this flyer down there, which we just used here in this presentation. Gives you an idea of who should benefit or who would benefit from that and gives you a basic understanding of it. There's a bunch of trainers, 17 around the world that can help you in your time zone, in your area where you are, sometimes in person, very often online, and can help you learn the pattern and get started with that, and also get certified through an assessment you can take online. So that would be option two to get started, deeper understanding of this topic. And then option three, because everything is very practical, I would invite you to possibly join what we call an Agile Kata Dojo, a more immersed kind of learning environment where you would actually start doing Agile Kata with somebody alongside. That could be one of the trainers or coaches on Agile Kata Pro, where you use more like a periodic kind of check-ins with people, but to really, really apply that for several weeks and get started. Remember, habit changes are not coming overnight. And on an organizational level, when you're working in teams with multiple individuals, not only one you're changing, but a group of people, it might take even a little bit more time. So that's not something, again, that comes overnight, but that's something that takes time to develop. But once it develops, it becomes second nature. And once it is second nature, you're turning your organization into a learning environment. And that is really what I was hoping to get across to you guys here in these few minutes I had with you, is to show you that there is huge success on an individual level. We can map the concepts as ideas. We find lots of similarities to how we work organizationally. We have ideas of how we can do this organizationally, and the evidence that it does actually work this way. Um, and just wanted to carve out the differences, but didn't want to leave you alone with just like, okay, here's Agile Kata and here's a book. There's actually more things you can do to get started, and obviously experimenting with the pattern itself. So yeah, just a last reminder here, one of our websites over here. I want to just say thank you, and more importantly now, it's like we do want to make sure we have enough time for questions over here. I want to bring Amara back in and see if we have any questions.